So more on levels of being. So this is on page 25. So he says that we know of no links or transitional forms out of the four levels. So there's nothing that is in between matter and life. There's nothing that's in between life and consciousness, nothing in between consciousness and self-awareness. That you either have it or you don't. And he also says, just under that, he says that each level has power over those lower than it. So it's not just that you accumulate more. It's not just matter accumulates life, accumulates consciousness, etc. It's that the conscience have power over life. So a cow will eat a plant. Plant has power over matter, as a plant will gather water and gather soil and nutrients for itself, right? And man, self-aware, has power over everything else, right? Consciousness. So we have cattle, we have pets, we control animals. So now we get more into what's going on in each level. So he talks about plants, for example, at the living levels. He says that, yes, what makes something alive? So he says that when the wind blows, a tree will shake. And that's a physical phenomenon, just like a rock would get, or a leaf could get blown by the wind. That's not a phenomenon of being alive. But he does say that when a plant grows or moves toward the sun, he says that that is a stimulus. So stimulus for him is what makes something alive, or at least the stimulus is what we can detect as something being alive has. So for in the example of the plant, he says that when the sun's rays are shining on a certain part of the plant's roots will grow stronger in one direction so as to lean the plant over. He says that that is stimulus. And that is what is, it's not just movement, it's not just the physical factor of wind blowing. Stimulus is what causes a change in the plant. And this is something he says is different than simply a rock being blown by the wind. On the next level, in consciousness, he says that the power in consciousness is motive. So animals will behave and act based on a motive. That is just like where plants have stimulus, animals have stimulus, but they also have motives. And that may explain some of the lower level thinking, a lower level planning, or it's like when rats run a maze and things like that. That may explain animal behavior through motive. Okay, now what about self-awareness? He says that the explanatory factor in self-awareness is the will. So he says the power of self-awareness gives him an additional motivation for movement, and that is the will, the power to move and act even when there is no physical compulsion, no physical stimulus, and no motivating force actually present. So that's different than a motive, for example. He says, this is on page 28, a dog is motivated and therefore moved, not merely by physical forces or stimuli, but also by forces originating in its inner space. Recognizing its master, it jumps for joy. Recognizing its enemy, it runs in fear. So let me just go over that quickly. So the stimulus for a plant comes from the outside always. A plant never does anything on its own. It is simply always responsive. So it's always waiting for an outside force. A conscious being, such as an animal, does have internal motives. There's something internal that causes it to move, almost like Aristotle's self-mover. So there is some capacity for that in there. For man and self-awareness, there is the will. And so the willpower will do things even without a motive from an internal, which is usually, again, responding to something external to it. But its force is in the distinction here between a plant moving towards the sun and an animal reacting to something is that at the level of life, such as a plant, is always reacting with a physical change. But an animal can react with a non-physical change, and that's this motive thing. So that's this like being jumping. It says jumping for joy at the recognition of a master, or running in fear at the recognition of an enemy. This is a non-physical change, and this is less. This is not a stimulus. This is a motive for behavior. And he's saying again, and I emphasize this, is that this is not merely of degree. So some people might say that all this is of degree, that a man is just a sophisticated animal, an animal is just a sophisticated plant. He's saying that these are different levels completely. And that's why he says, and that's his proof to say that there's no transitionary things. It's either you're life, or you're conscious, or you're self-aware, and there's no middle ground there. So now moving up to self-awareness and man, the willpower is even less connected. I guess you could put it this way in terms of what we've been describing here. We've been describing the how connected is the linkage between cause and effect. So a rock is 100% cause and effect. A plant is, 90% cause and effect. An animal is 60%. A man is, 40%. And that, of course, is where that debate comes in about the free will. Is it free? How much of our decisions and our will, our ego, whatever word you want to use, how much of it is free and how much of it is again connected to the cause and effect? When we get up in the morning, is it because we have a free will to do what we want? Or is it because, I got stuff to do today? And some people would say that, well, that stuff to do today is your cause. It's like your wind blowing on a rock. It's causing you to do things. Or if you get an urge, you have to go to the bathroom, there's your cause. Just like, again, a wind blowing on a tree. And some people say, that our will is not free because our will is always just simply responding to some previous event. Can we truly have a random or an unconnected event? Well, as soon as you try to do that, if you say, okay, I'm going to do something random, well, someone's going to say, but you're doing that because you're trying to defeat this idea of determinism, and so you're going to just do a random event that way. So again, it's difficult to win the argument because people always just simply say, well, you're doing that because of. It's hard to do something completely random or unforeseen because there's usually a way to connect to some previous event. And connecting it to a previous event is a way of trying to show that where we don't really have a will or a free will, we have always these motives it's always connected with some event. So a dog does not do something random. A dog acts in accordance with what's going on. So it hears a knock at the door, it starts barking, or it sees someone familiar, it will run up to it, right? So there's always this kind of cause and effect. How are we disconnected? How much are we disconnected from cause? And can we be what Aristotle called a self-mover? Can we cause things without a previous cause, right? Without just being an effect? If a rock is 100% an effect, so it's always just being eroded by the weather, it's being blown around by the wind, what capacity then is man? In what respect can we take charge and resist outside forces, right? And you certainly can show and say that, well, it seems like there are different kinds of people, that some people can resist it and some people cannot. And you could even say that some people that get into addictions is a way of, it's a cause. And people who have less resistance to drugs or less resistance, I think of another example completely, less resistance to being interrogated. Maybe they have less willpower and are more easily defeated by stimulus or by those or advertisements. If people are more inclined to vote a certain way or to buy a certain product because of advertisements, they may be operating on motive like an animal would, and not operating on a free will. And so, whereas Schumacher would definitely say that all human beings have will, but it's an interesting question again as to how much will some people may have, and if that's genetic or it's behavior or it's environment or whatever it might be. One's capacity to the willpower that people have, is that capacity through education? Is it through childhood experiences? Maybe if you were able to have more autonomy as a child, you will demand more autonomy and thus have more free will or more willpower as an adult. So it's an interesting question about what capacity we have to resist these causes.